with my guy Jordan from Sabersim. We're gonna do this each and every week in office hours where we're gonna talk all things Sabersim. We are going to answer your questions. So please throw your questions in the YouTube chat, or if you are a member, throw them in the live show chat in our Discord. And if you're not a member, you should be, and you should go sign up for the RunPureSports Sabersim package. And yeah, let's so we got Jordan here. We're going to cover a few different things, PGA related, NBA related. We're not going to dive into like specific slate stuff. I mean, maybe we will. Maybe, we'll see where this goes. But really what we want to do is talk about Sabersim, how to use it, how to gain an edge over the field, and then answer any questions. So fire questions away at any point in time, and we'll get to them. Jordan, how is it going today?
It's good, man. I'm excited to be back on here on another Run Pure stream, talking a little Sabersim. Should be fun. So, yeah, I mean, you said it. Ask any questions you guys have. That's what I'm here for. Anything you've been using Sabersim for a bit or whatever, or maybe it's your first day with it. You have any questions at all about how to get more out of the tool, let me know. But yeah, I wanted to start here. You know, we've got the golf builder up here. We actually pushed out a feature earlier this week here that, you know, if you've been building with the NBA or NFL builders for a bit, you're probably familiar with, but wasn't set up until now on the golf side. So you guys all already know here, you've got the cores loaded in. You've got BigT's core. You got AP's core here. On the golf side here, you can now go ahead and set the rules to actually, you know, incorporate these into your lineups just like you can for other sports. So, you know, I know BigT and AP doing their research, working hard on putting the cores together. You want to rely on that. You want to make sure that kind of stuff is getting into your lineups. You can go in here, click the build lineups button, hop over to the rules tab, and then set this rule. All lineups must include at least however many players from the core players you've got selected here. So maybe in this case, you know, we want to say I want one from BigT and I want one from AP. And then we'll set those rules here and we can build some lineups here. And we'll make sure that we're getting one golfer from each set of the cores here. So, and it looks like you guys, you and BigT had two kind of different unique sets of cores this week. So this should work pretty good here for building this, but cool little feature on the PGA side that lets you get a little bit more control over your lineup, start incorporating some of those Run Pure cores.
I didn't even see who did BigT have in his core. I actually, usually I see it. I didn't see my guy's core this week.
Let's look. So he had Cantlay, Troy Merritt, Dean Burmeister, and Grayson Sigg here. And it looks like, you know, this is the one thing, too, with the way the builder kind of works. It looks like the Run Pure projections and this rule it is favoring your core a little bit more. Jamming Cantlay into every single lineup from BigT's core, and then kind of mixing in some of your core guys here.
I like that.
Alongside that, so.
With PGA specifically, I found that projections are very difficult. So is there anything that you recommend doing projection-wise with PGA? Or is it kind of trial and error? That's how it's been for me. I make my adjustments, and I'm really, and tell me if I'm right or wrong in doing this, I'm really looking at that value button or that value column, and I want to make sure that the guys I want to be overweight on and that I want to over project have a strong value number attached to them. Is that a right approach, wrong approach? I mean, how are you typically doing it?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, so I think you're right on with the idea that the average projections are, you know, aren't as useful so much in golf, right? I mean, we can even just look at this. So one of the cool things too that I like to look at here is you can pull up these ranges of outcomes for a particular golfer and see, you know, in our simulations where are their results landing? And we get this kind of binary split of results. That is what we would expect here, right? We see, you know, the miscut outcomes here for Maverick, and then the make cut outcomes all the way, you know, going to like the big ceiling outcomes where he's winning the tournament or something like that. And, you know, you can almost kind of see that, you know, this average of saying, you know, he's projected for 92.2 doesn't really tell the whole story of what his possible outcomes are for the tournament. I don't focus too much on the average projections for golf here for that reason exactly. One of the main things that I like to focus on and just make sure that I'm doing when I'm building my golf lineups is really make sure that I'm rolling with a pretty high sim variance here, because ultimately what's going to be more important for your lineups rather than the average is the individual tournament outcomes or small subsets of tournament outcomes for each of these guys. So I would say, I know that we've talked a little bit before about experimenting with maybe lower sim variance sliders and things like that. I would say keep this value really high. I would almost never go below 8 on golf, just because, a way to think about this sim variance slider is a value of how important do you want average projections to be on the left compared to how important do you want individual sim outcomes to be on the right. And in golf, when we have this binary distribution where, the average projection just, doesn't really tell the whole story of what the chance is for where certain outcomes lie, I want this to be much more on the high side. So that's probably the most important thing that I'm looking at here when I'm putting my golf lineups together.
No, that is interesting. What about if you pull up that step 2 area again? What about salary? So are you doing anything with minimum salary in PGA each week?
Minimum, I like to leave pretty low, just like we have it here by default. I think there are some lower salary builds that can definitely get there. I will actually, especially if I'm playing some large field stuff like the big marquee tournaments, I will actually experiment with bringing down the maximum salary here. Not too much, but sometimes I'll kind of mess with, maybe something like 49.7 or 49.5. For that, mostly I'm worried about trying to avoid getting duplicated in my contests. Especially, if it's a big large field tournament, maybe it's a week where the chalk is going to get really chalky or something like that. I'm expecting a lot of people are going to be building pretty similar lineups. I will knock this down a bit. Again, people that are out there, maybe building with a more traditional optimizer that's just optimizing for pure average projection, those tools are always going to overvalue filling up the maximum salary to pack as many average projected points as possible. And again, that's not really what wins these tournaments, right? We're looking for those big ceiling outcomes for these guys. You're looking to, maybe put together a lineup of 6 golfers that are all finishing top 10 with the top 1, 2, 3, especially in the large field tournaments. So a lot of times you can get some lower salary builds in there to get there. So I like this. If you're playing some larger field stuff, I like bringing the salary down, and it doesn't need to come down too far. Again, I think a lot of times I end up right about here, 49.7 on DraftKings for my builds. So
I like that. And it goes against it never feels good when you do that. But at the same time, I do think it is a plus EV move because you're, severely going to hopefully reduce the amount, your ability to dupe with someone else just by doing that alone. So the 49, I usually go 49,900, 49,900. And just to eliminate but it never I'll find a build that I like, the zero outs the salary, and I'm always like, yes. But again, it's just it's in PGA specifically, you don't need to do that. And when you're zeroing out your salary, the odds increase that you're going to dupe with someone else, right? Especially on a slate like this one where we do have Cantlay, who is a tier above everyone else on this PGA slate. So, if you have a build where you're playing Cantlay, and let's just say, I know, Matt Kuchar ended up being, I didn't think he was going to be as popular as he was. We ended up making him one of our kind of flag plant plays of the week, and because I thought he was going to be lower owned, he ended up being about 23% higher stakes. If you start your builds with Cantlay, Kuchar, and then one of those other, one of those other popular guys up there, you're going to be a 1v1, maybe a 2v2 versus a lot of people, or having the same lineup as a lot of people as well. And I think in PGA, eliminating those dupes is something that you definitely want to do. So I've always struggled with the downside, the minimum salary. I've always I think in PGA I keep it. I think my floor is right around 49,000. So I might next week have to experiment with bringing that down just a little bit, especially in those deep field events like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that 47 line works pretty good. One thing that I'll do too is just a way to get kind of familiar with what kind of lineups are viable here is I'll run builds where I'll just take this off completely, turn this to 0, just see what I'm getting out of this. And one thing here, kind of a secondary feature, but we have this ability to sort your lineups by salary. So let's actually just do this real quick since we have a minute here, and I'll just kind of show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to remove the cores here, and let's put maximum salary back up to 50. And just kind of see, let's run some lineups and just get an idea of what the full run of salary the builder thinks is viable for the slate. And again, I think one of the coolest things that is about Sabersim here is that anytime you're doing this, anytime you're running these builds, just experiment just to see how things are looking. You know that you're not just getting lineups that are optimized for average projection that just kind of fit in. You're actually getting lineups that, are optimal for a particular set of simulations. Like these lineups actually could be theoretically the optimal scoring lineup. So we can go in here and see, right? Let's sort by salary. So as we might expect, our highest salary lineup is a maximum salary lineup, but let's see what our lowest salary lineups here are. So, there's lineups here. Not that I would be rushing to go and play these or anything like that, right? But in our first 500 lineups we are making, in our pool of 500, there's lineups that are as low as, 42, 43 here that, at least for a particular set of simulations are coming up as optimal. So again,
one thing I would do is maybe like eliminate the guys that just have zero chance. Like we have some guys down in the low 6K. Like I don't care how many sims you run, Jordan. Like I don't think they're going to end up in the winner. And so if you eliminate those first and then do that, I think that would be really interesting. That's something I'm going to experiment with next week. And that's the fun part about using Sabersim too, is just the research component behind it. Messing around with and just, raising it and lowering the projections or keeping them the same and using, kind of min max and then using the sliders and letting them do their thing or using the rules put in, making sure there is X, amount of players from, whatever coordinator's core that is going in there. So like did you take that rule off? What was it? Did you say you just had to have one player from my core and Big T's? Or
yeah, let's jump back to the other build here. So this one was one player from your core and one player from Big T's core. So it looks like it's jam and can't lay in, and then it kind of is mixing in, a little bit of different exposure from the golfers in your core here. So. But I wanted to show one more feature too. This just popped into my head here. This is something else we added this week that I think is pretty cool. So you mentioned, Kuchar got steamed up a little bit. He came in a little bit higher owned than I think maybe we were expecting. Let's say, you had the foresight there to know that maybe that was going to happen. And you said, I want to play some Cantlay. I want to play some Kuchar, but I don't want these two guys in any lineup together. Right. We actually added a new feature that kind of lets you do that here now. So if you were to go in and filter and see all of your Cantlay lineups and then go in and look for Kuchar here and filter by all your lineups that have both, we now added this new button that says removed filtered lineups. So you can bulk just remove all of these lineups from your pool that have both of them together. And I think the easiest way to do that is to actually go to your pool here. Click remove filtered lineups. It's saying there's 99 lineups that have this combination of golfers. Are you sure you want to remove? Click confirm. And then remove these filters here. And we'll pop this back up to 20 so we get our lineups back up. And now we have no lineups that have both of them in there. It looks like in this particular case, it said, okay, you don't want to play these two guys together, then we're just going to give you 100% Cantlay, which makes sense because of how he's projected for this slate. But pretty cool new tool here. And if we wanted to come back in and say, maybe give me a little bit of Kuchar here, we can get a little bit back in there. So
I like that. So we had a question come in. One was on here. I don't have salaries on mine. I think that's just a function at the home screen. You might have a filter unselected. So right where his cursor is at is where you want to go.
Yep. So these columns are totally editable here. This little table icon, you can go in here. What probably happened is that this, somehow ended up unchecked. So that column disappears. You can go right back in here and add it back in. So
we had another question in our Discord. So Butter is asking, if I make changes to my player pool, for instance, remove everyone but 10 players, then later check them all again and switch to Big T's pool, it seems when I make changes to the pool, I can no longer use Big T's pool later. You'll see all the golfers will remain when I choose Big T's pool. Do you get what he's asking there?
Maybe here. I'm just gonna kind of practice here and try. So we'll remove a couple guys from the pool and then switch over to Big T's here.
Okay, then do you have to add them back?
Yeah, it seems like so. It seems like.
Okay, so is he asking basically he wants Big T's pool, but then he wants to add some of his own golfers?
I'm a little confused. I'm not sure.
If that's what's being asked, I would go to Big T's pool first, and then go to removed, and then add back the guys you like, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably the easiest thing to do here. I'm just going to kind of try to reset this back to the way it was here. So yeah, I don't know actually. Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to do that here. I don't know where Cantlay went at all. Let's see. There we go.
Yeah, in his core.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
Another thing too that I found sometimes, if there's ever like anything like a hard reset, always if there's something funny coming up, try a hard reset. It's kind of like, if the router is giving you issues, go down there, unplug it, wait 30 seconds, plug it back in. I found that solves quite a bit of issues as well, which they actually haven't been coming up. I haven't had any issues as far as like glitches in quite some time. So
the hard refreshes, turn it off, turn it back on always seems to help do the trick. So
let's see. Do we have any other questions? As far as so with PGA, this is always this is kind of just maybe a strategy discussion. But as far as with Saber, if you're running 150, do you have an opinion on how many players that you are typically including in there, or with the pros at Sabersim, what are they typically doing?
Yeah, so I don't like to do, for golf in particular, I won't do so much player pool curation up front in my particular process here. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll let kind of the sliders that we have here, the defaults for something like a 150, maybe you're playing the larger field stuff, right? You're going to see this sim variance gets cranked all the way up to 10 by default. And this slider, again, is going to have a ton of control over how many golfers you actually end up with in your pool. So let's go ahead and take this off here just real quickly. I'm going to take the rules off. And if we run this, I will typically play with a pretty wide pool. So I'll run this on default settings. And from there, I find myself, I'm typically capping max exposures and widening my pool in golf rather than trying to play with a really tight pool. But, if you want to rock with a pretty tight core, you want a set of golfers here that is in, most of your lineups, I think that's fine too. So, my approach, go ahead.
I like that. So this is kind of a big, there's two, it seems like there's two clear schools of thought here. Having that tight player pool versus doing would you say that's like a bet that like what you're doing is betting on variance, like the high variance the sport of golf is. So it's like, if the chalk busts, I'm going to have, even though my player pool is going to be larger, if one of these guys win, that's going to be extremely low owned. I'm going to have a unique and some decent upside in there. Is that kind of what you're betting on?
Exactly right. Yep. I think at the end of the day, the difference between the golfers in the best spot and the worst spot for a particular tournament, to me, isn't as large as the field may typically make it out to be. So I want to be pretty well exposed. and pretty heavily exposed to a lot of different golfers in the field. This looks pretty similar to what I would actually end up playing here in terms of exposures. This is a weird tournament where Cantlay is kind of the odd man out left up top, where I would be comfortable being a little more overexposed than I typically would. But a lot of times my max exposure to a golfer, if I'm building 150 for a typical tournament, is like 40% for me.
Gotcha. So for me, I love golf, watch it, week by week. And I've always been a fan of a smaller player pool, but that's just because I have my guys that I like to get overweight on. But I don't think there's like a right or wrong way of doing it. I think you just have to be comfortable with your process and what you're doing. And I will say, I really like your strategy, especially at Birdie Fest. So the thing about golf right now is all of these players that are coming up, especially these young guys, are so talented. All of them are going to have this ability to, if they can find ways to close on Sunday. I think golf is going to be one of the higher, variant sports moving forward. And so I like that approach, especially at Birdie Fest type events where we see these random guys win from time to time. So that's definitely something I'm going to be experimenting with moving forward. And everyone's different. I know Tony, BigT is an under 30. He will often have under 30 in his pool, and he gets very overweight on his guys. And we saw it when you hit the nuts. We saw what happened for him at the Players last year. So, won $1 million. I try to be under 45. Usually try to be under 40. But I think for me moving forward, it might be kind of an event by event type of thing where I'm adjusting my pool based off of different things. But my main thing is there's no really right or wrong approach. I just love the ability to use Saber and to help me dial in my exposures and to use it even just from a research standpoint. So I like that though. It's definitely very interesting when it comes to PGA.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think if you're going in here and building a rule in to incorporate some of the players from the coordinator cores, you're going to naturally get a set of lineups that is a little bit more condensed, even with a high sim variance setting. So I think that would be a good way, if you're looking at that and you're like, man, Jordan, I don't know if I want a 79 golfer player pool for my 150. I totally get that. I think just going in here, still using the default sliders, but going in and setting this and saying something like, I want 2 or 3 golfers from these cores, you'll get a lot more of a condensed pool, or at least some more condensed exposures for those top guys right at the top. So
yeah, Kent Foyt had a good mention right there. So what he said was he was getting a decent, Harrell and Gafford into his builds. It looks like he went in there and used that feature. So where you could just delete all of those builds. I actually learned something new today, Jordan. I did not know that you added that function in there. So I'm going to be using that. I actually made this, if we, going over to NBA.
Yeah.
Last night I had a build where I had Terry. So Isaiah Jackson, the chalk guy who busted, I had his backup in a build, and I had Malik Monk in the utility spot. I actually manually changed, and now Malik Monk had a bad game, so it didn't really matter. I wouldn't have won anything, but I would have been live because I had the backup, and I shouldn't have gone against what Sabersim was trying to get me to do, which was having a better correlated lineup where I was avoiding the starter there, playing Terry. It would have been just the perfect script. Then Malik Monk, similar price tag, would have been a great way. But Malik Monk would have hurt my feelings anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. But still, it just comes down to trusting the process.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. And that feature with the filtered lineups, I think is pretty slick. A good thing to note too, and you just hit on it perfectly, right, is that, we're still taking into account the correlations between players, the negative correlations, especially, right? You get a guy like Embiid, who's he negatively correlated to, Andre Drummond, some of these other guys in the lineup here. We're taking that into account naturally when we're building lineups. NBA is a little bit of a lower correlation sport, but it's still coming into play here. So don't feel like, I guess what I'm trying to say is don't feel like, if you've just seen this for the first time on stream, that all of a sudden you need to go and rush off and find every negatively correlated player on the slate and go in and remove them all from your lineups. I think it's mostly just a good tool, if you have a situation like last night. And, I think that would have been a really sharp play to be like, Isaiah Jackson, Terry Taylor, there's no way these two guys can be successful together, right? One guy's ceiling is going to come at the expense of the other, and probably couldn't predict the first play rolled ankle for Isaiah Jackson, but you still probably could, see that negative correlation situation coming up and then eliminate both of them together. Or I think the user mentioned Harrell and Gafford, same deal, right? Those kind of competing bigs on the same team. A lot of times those guys are pretty negatively correlated. I think that's a good use of the new feature. So
since we have NBA up, what is a good practice for people to start doing up to lock when they're watching the shows, when they're taking in the content? Is it making sure they're updating projections, adding their own everyone knows I like to add some manual adjustments. I usually try to wait till like a later point. So I'm usually clicking the update projections. Then when we're maybe 60 to 70 minutes out from lock, then I start my manual process. And I'm usually doing it. So tonight I'm on the show, usually towards the tail end of the show. I'm multitasking a little bit, and I'm starting my manual adjustments of guys that I want to bump up a little bit. Mm-hmm. But what is a good practice, habit for people to get into as far as an up to lock process with using Saber?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you and Big T were telling me about last time I was on here about kind of filtering through the individual teams, going each game by game, watching along with some of the live before lock shows that you guys are putting on here, and keeping track of what you're hearing, what people are saying, and in particular, I think one of the best practices I can recommend for that is if you're listening here, think about what you're hearing on the show, who are the players that you guys like, and also how they're currently projected, right? So, for tonight's slate, maybe we like Towns or something like that. Comparing his actual current projection above other centers or other players in his same salary range and seeing, what do I need to do to get more of him in my lineups? One of the best practices I can recommend overall, and this is any sport, this is just anytime you're using Sabersim here, is to do what we call a test build. And this would be just something, maybe this is an hour before lock, maybe this is 30 minutes before lock, however much time you need. And this will just give you an idea of what does the builder already want to do? How does the builder want to play the slate? And if you're playing single entry, do it with the single entry settings. If you're doing 150, do it with the 150 settings. I'm doing a 20 max build here. And this will just give you an idea of what's kind of going on here. So, if you get this and you run this build here, we're getting 85% Anthony Davis, and then you're watching the RunPure stream here and the coordinators are talking about Anthony Davis, right? Well, maybe, we're already getting plenty of him, right? We don't necessarily need to give a bump, right? But if maybe there's some lower owned plays here at the top end, maybe you're not really getting any Jimmy Butler, and Jimmy Butler's in, Big T's core, or Big T's talking about Butler, right? This is a guy that you're going to need to give a little bit of a bump to, and we know that because we ran a test build and we see how the builder's kind of treating these guys. So, I think that's how I'd recommend doing it, is listen to the show, work through kind of team by team, but have this framework from the test build that you ran that you kind of know what the RunPure projections and what Sabersim want to do on the slate just by default. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does. And I will give kind of a pro tip to anyone out there. So if our styles, so I'll just talk about myself first. With my process, it usually allows me to get a core up early. It's just how it is. It's how it doesn't mean the core's not going to change. It definitely can, but I'm usually trying to put out there some players that I feel good. No matter what news hits, I'm likely not to change them. But with Big T, he's very transparent. If you're watching the Up to Lock show, he's very transparent about what he is going to do. And so just listen to what they're talking about up to lock, and you could almost bump up some of the players that he's keying in on before he even posts his core. Get it in there. If you're running 150, bump them up, and you're naturally going to be higher or higher allocated to the players that he likes. Get your build in and enter it, and then you can always make the adjustments, especially on slates where it's you'll see on there. Sometimes what we do, Jordan, is let's just say there's one island game at 7 p.m. Eastern. let's just say it's usually it's like the Pistons against like Orlando or something.
Yeah.
I actually think that was the other day, and it's like, oh, fade this. So you'll see on there fading all the 7 p.m. games. Well, just cross those games out, run it. Now you know all your players are and now you can work solely in the late swap feature, right? Which is awesome. And
Yep.
I mean, now you're already probably having a nice edge over the field since you're working in that post lock environment using Sabersim here. So that's kind of how I would do it, watching the shows and keying in. Like because some people are like, well, the cores come up, 10 minutes before lock, it's hard to adjust. Part of it is just listening, watching, because they're being very transparent about what their plays are. And sometimes those plays come in late because we need news in the NBA DFS world. So just kind of a little pro tip there if you're a member and you're watching that Up to Lock show and using Sabersim at the same time.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really important point about NBA too. I say it on the Sabersim streams all the time too, that your NBA process ultimately kind of needs to be pretty tight, and it needs to be pretty adaptable when news is breaking 15 minutes before lock, because it's going to. It's that's what's going to happen eventually, right? I would say, doing a little bit of research ahead of time, getting an idea of how things are looking, but being ready to swap and pivot if you need to as news is breaking. Because the most valuable thing, maybe you've done all this research leading up to lock, but if 15 minutes before the slate locks, the Timberwolves say we're giving Towns the night off for rest, that's going to change the slate completely. You got to be able to be ready to adapt and update for that. So
I think it's going to get crazier too. So we have the trade deadline. It's like next Wednesday? It's either the 8th or the 9th. Sometime next week. So, it's going to get crazy. You're going to want to, be using this post lock feature for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. And every year after the All-Star break too, you start getting those slates where a lot more guys are getting rested. Teams are looking ahead to the playoffs and things like that. So the late swap's just going to get crazier. It's just going to get more valuable for DFS purposes. So definitely a good tool to be familiar with there. But
so yesterday, Joe, I was playing around with this, and so I wasn't MMEing, like I wasn't playing 50 lineups or more. I was doing just 5. I was focused on the 888, and I really just wanted to use Sabersim to help me identify 5 very strong builds for the night. And so what I was doing is I would lock in, say, 3 players from my core or from other people's cores. Mm-hmm. One of them was, so I made sure my projections were solid. I made some manual adjustments, but I made sure the projections across the slate were solid at that given time point. And then what I would do is I would have little in-game stacks, and I'd want to see what the builds looked like for each. So one of them was Kyle Kuzma, Dinwiddie, and then Embiid. And so then I would let Sabersim kind of run it, and I would see those 3 lineups in every single build, and I'd run like 30 to 40, and then I would just go through, kind of sift through, and I would fine-tune and find the build that I really liked that I wanted to run with that stack. And so even if you're like, my point with mentioning that, even if you're not a 150 max player, there's like I used to be manual. Like I used to build everything, manually. And man, you know how long it takes to see like different builds with that stack? Like you're sitting there with your phone, like just like going, and it's just a much more efficient way and better use of your time when building that. And so that was I did an MME last night, played 5 main lineups, and it was fun building it like that, focusing on different stacks and using the tool just by locking in players. So that was just something I wanted to highlight.
I think that's a great point. And so I think there is sometimes a perception too that, people will see Sabersim and will be like, oh, this is really cool, but this is definitely for MME. I'm more of a hand build or a single entry kind of guy. And it really isn't the case. I think what you were just describing is a great way to do that, going in, locking your players in step 1, building a bunch of builds that kind of include those players. Another approach that I like to do here is to make use of our filters and to kind of just look, in this case, I built 500 lineups. Maybe we're building for kind of more of a high stakes 3 max kind of build. And we've got maybe a core that we want to roll with. So maybe, one of those guys is AD. We can click and filter here. Maybe we pick out a couple value plays. I know that the big men for the Spurs are all banged up, so maybe we want Eubanks in there. And maybe there's like a lower owned value play. I'm just kind of making some things up here, but maybe we get Gary Trent in there, who was shooting hot the other night. And this is kind of our core, right? We've decided what we want to roll with the core here. We can actually go in here. I like to click this little arrow button and it'll hide this whole exposure section, and just click our pool and just start looking through lineups. Right.
I like that.
And this will be a way of just speeding up that process. If you're used to hand building on your phone or directly on the site, right? I mean, you said it best, that it takes a long time to just kind of see, what fits. And this way, we're just looking at a bunch of lineups. These are already done. And maybe you're going through here and you can filter down even more. Maybe you're like, I don't want to play Wiggins tonight. Not interested. Right. Let's go ahead, open this back up. Let's find Wiggins. And this time, let's do negative filter. And say now, okay, show me all the lineups with no Wiggins. So you're narrowing down a little bit further, right?
I like that.
And we keep going. And then as we're finding lineups we like, I think this is a cool way to do it. So you don't even have to decide what are my final lineups I'm playing. As we find lineups we like, let's click them in. So we'll check this one here, click it into the pool. Maybe we like this one. Click this one into the pool. Click this one into the pool. Now we come back here and we're saying, okay, so I figured out 6 lineups I really liked. I'm going to clear all these filters. So we're going to kind of reset everything back to the way it was. And now go back to my lineups. And now I've got to decide, I'm going to narrow down. I'm rolling 3 lineups. I picked 6 I like, and I'm just going to narrow it down from there. And I think it's just a quicker way. I think it's a more effective way. I think you'll get better quality lineups overall than trying to go through and try to hand build everything right up against lock. This is also going to allow you to do this a lot faster. Maybe you spent your half hour hand building your lineups and you're all set. Lock's coming and big news breaks again and all the projections change and you're trying to scramble to update things. I think this is a little bit of a quicker way to do that when news breaks quickly. So.
Yeah, I love that. And so that's a great way too, that screen that you had up.
Yeah.
If you remember to highlight some 2v, so people often like to ask 1v1 or 2v2 questions in Discord. We try to get them to shy away from the 3v3. Those do come in sometimes. You have to understand it's very difficult even 2v2s can be tough because there's a lot of context that we're missing to the question because, X, Y, and Z player versus, ABC player. I mean, there's other things that come in that we're going to need to know. But
right,
that's a great way to do it. So you have all your builds up and you can see like, Derek White, Andrew Wiggins, or Devin Booker, and, whoever. I mean, and then visually it's right in front of you. So I've learned two things now. I did not know that you could pull the lineups up like that. So I've already learned 2 things, Jordan. This is a good start to this office hour shows. I like it. Let's see if we have any other questions. So Anthony Wright, in step 3, when fine-tuning, adjusting percentages, is there a way to save those projections exposures to be used in step 1?
Gotcha. Yeah. So a question we've heard before, right? There's not really an easy way to do this at the moment, to be totally honest. So I think what the question here is like, if you've gone through it, maybe you've limited your exposure to Anthony Davis. Is there a way to export these exposures and bring them back to step 1? At the moment, there is not, to be completely honest there. I think the easiest thing to do, would be run your test build, see where things are at, kind of get an idea of where you want to go with exposures. And then if you want to go back to step 1, to just manually bring them back here. If you are building with a pretty diverse pool of lineups to begin with, though, you're using a pretty high sim variance setting, you should be able to get things about where you want them to be all just in one build on step 3. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, it looks like tonight's slate isn't going to be, well, for me, it doesn't look like it's going to be be able to fade the 7 Eastern games, but it depends. A lot of news to be had.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Let's see.
There's a couple in YouTube here. So it looks like Anthony also asked in YouTube here, can I make a bucket to compile all of my favorite lineups from a different build on a slate? So I kind of showed here how you would do that all in one build a minute ago. So one thing I'll note here, let me pull this back up. Give this just a second here. So we can name this lineup set too. So let's go back and say, we're going back to that original set of 6 lineups that we really liked. We can save this here and call this a new set, and say, I don't know, maybe these are your high stakes single entries or something like that. And this will make it easy to keep track of this build later. There isn't a way at the moment to kind of add lineups from different builds to the same lineup set. That's something that we want to add as well. So you could, maybe you're building, maybe this is your high stakes single entry stuff, but later you're working on your 150 and you just see a lineup and you're like, wow, I actually want to play that in the high stakes stuff. Not a super easy way at the moment to like add that to a lineup set, but that's something that's on our radar as well. It's a popular request. So we want to add that in the future too.
Yeah, that definitely would be nice, a nice feature to add for sure. Is there anything like from step 1 to step 3, any other feature that you think, like hidden gem type thing? Since I've already learned 2 new things, maybe we could make it a third on this show, Jordan.
Yeah. I'm thinking now if there's anything that I can hit you with here. I'll say this. I don't know. This so much isn't a feature, I guess, here as much. But a common question is, okay, so I can do the same things on step 1 that I can do on step 3. I can edit projections. I can edit exposures here. Why would I do it on step 1 or step 3, or when should I do it on step 1 versus step 3? And our philosophy over that is, if you're making kind of bigger changes, if you're setting the foundation of the strategy you want to use to tackle the slate, you should do that stuff in step 1. And what that means is that when you build your lineups and you build your pool of lineups, you're going to get a better overall foundation of lineups in step 3 to work with, which match the way you want to tackle the slate. So for example, right, we just ran a test build, and maybe, we saw that Anthony Davis is going to show up in a lot of our lineups right now with how he's currently projected. Maybe you've already kind of decided that you want to be a little under on AD. I always think being a little bit under on AD feels kind of good just with how often he goes to the locker room. So maybe you've decided that's your stance, and you want to be a little under on him. That's your overall strategy. If we've already ran the test build and we can see that we're going to get a lot of AD by default, dropping his projection here in step 1 is going to give you a little bit better results here than doing it in step 3, right? But now let's run the build, see what we're getting out of this. So then common question, like, okay, I got it. Then what do I do in step 3? What's the point of step 3? Step 3 is a perfect opportunity for fine tuning, for we like to call it quality control. So maybe you've put a couple custom projections in step 1, maybe you have some custom exposures, and you're looking back through here, and let's go look at AD again, right? So now you're getting none, and you're like, okay, well, I want to fade, or I want to be even with the field. I don't want to totally fade him. Now would be a good opportunity to do something like add back in, 10% to match the field. And that's kind of what I mean about, bigger foundation strategy stuff. Step 1, quality controlling kind of things here more in step 3 is a really good approach for that. So, or maybe you look at this and you're like, man, do I really need to get 100% exposure to 6% owned Gary Trent? Well, maybe not. Maybe I bring this down a little bit here, kind of thing. So
is it better to adjust the because the other way you could have done it is adjust his projection up, right? Is it better to just use the min max, or to adjust the projections up to a certain point in that step 3?
It's up to you.
Like a 2.5 point per projection bump versus, say, like a 7 point projection bump. If you're bumping it 7, which is pretty substantial, is that something you should be doing in step 1 versus step 3?
Yeah, I mean, if you're making pretty significant changes to projections, I think you're going to get a better pool of lineups that matches what you want to do if you do that in step 1. So yeah, I mean, I would say, if you're changing a player's projection by 10% or more or so, probably better to do some of that in step 1. It's perfectly fine to do that here in step 3 too. It's not, nothing's going to go wrong, but the more and more changes you make in step 3, the more and more you whittle down this pool of 500. And if you're making significant changes, it would have been better doing that in step 1. But in terms of like the AD example here from a second ago, right? Like, is it better to, let's remove this again. So we want some AD. We didn't want to completely remove him from our pool. Is it better to get him back with the min exposure or with the projection? At that point, it doesn't matter. We could have just as easily, gone in here and said, let's bring him back up to 49.5. And then we start getting a little exposure to him. So.
Gotcha. How is there a way? So the cash core is usually up as far as like a core piece.
Yep.
Usually like within an hour up until lock. And we know cash plays generally are going to be the on paper best plays.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way? And a lot of times you'll see cash plays be in GPP winning lineups, and it's just a function of getting different elsewhere. So a good practice might be, if you're a tournament player, include the cash core in there. How would you, if you're doing that though, how would you get different in tournaments, in large field tournaments? If you want to, does that question make sense? You want to include the cash core plays, but would it be a function of just increasing the slider to the max, or?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think, one of the easiest kind of blanket things to do, let's say you went in here and you said, how big's the cash core normally?
Yeah, usually they have 3 to 4 players in their max.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, so let's say you went in here, and we don't have the cash core up here yet, but let's say you went in here and you set the rule and you said, I just want to lock the cash core in, right? I'm going to say 3 players, and let's just assume this says cash core, right? So you're just locking them in. So 3 of your 8 guys here are already going to be pretty chalky. They're probably going to be pretty popular. I think there's a bunch of different things you could do to get different in the rest of the lineup. I think a simple one would be to crank up the ownership fade slider just a little bit. That you're already going to force some of those chalkier plays in, so you might as well make the rest of the lineup maybe a little bit lower owned. I think another thing to do would be to go check out, AP or BigT or any of the other coordinators, check out those cores and see, maybe there's a low owned guy in there, right? Is there a lower owned guy with some upside? Let's look, maybe someone like Devontae Murray goes into lock, questionable, not going to be as popular of a play. Maybe you want to get a little bit more exposure to him in the rest of your lineup. A couple things you could do here. Maybe you set a minimum exposure, right? Give me at least 20%, give me 5x the field or 4x the field on Devontae. Maybe you bump up his projection a little bit, right? And you go and kind of cherry pick some individual plays that you want to get into the lineup. So I think it kind of depends on your approach. If there were particular lower owned plays that you wanted to target to get in there, I would say bump their projections, bump their exposure here. If you just said, I want to make sure that the rest of the lineup around that cash core is pretty low owned, I would say maybe, bump the ownership fade slider a little bit here and get there.
I was going to say, let's try that, but I'll be honest. Usually I've looked at the slate by now, but I haven't yet. So I'll be just diving in. Do we know who kind of are some early players that are projecting to be somewhat popular?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, so there's not a lot of really spectacular value popping at this point in the day. I think this is actually, while we're on the subject, this is a good way to kind of get familiar, even if it's before the cash pool comes out, right? If you want to get an idea of what is the slate looking like, just looking at what the best point per dollar plays by sorting by the value column can be a good way to do that. But I think Eubanks is probably going to be pretty popular especially if we don't get a lot more news.
Okay, yeah, let's lock him in. Yeah, I just saw that Pirtle's out and Jock is also out. So Eubanks. And then probably, Eubanks. I mean, I'm trying. Keldon Johnson. No, he maybe not projecting to be as popular, but probably. Hernan Gomez as well would be. Let's just stick with Eubanks and let's find 2 others that are going to be somewhat popular. Have to think AD.
Yeah, right? I think so.
That double center.
Yep.
let's lock him. And then is there one other? And then I just cranking up that slider and seeing what it does.
Yeah, I mean, Derek White is another guy too that I think is maybe going to be a little bit more on the popular side, just because he's kind of cheap.
Yep.
Projects pretty well here, so maybe we just throw him in there.
Yeah, so let's just say if this was the cash core, and then we want to get different in tournaments.
Yeah, so let's see what we get. So I bumped up the ownership fade slider by 2 notches here. It was at 4 by default. Bumped it to 6 here. It looks like a projection's just updated too here. So, but we'll see what comes out of this.
Yeah, I saw Gary Scott Rodder, Gary Trent also popping. I kind of saw that as well. On the surface, it looks like a fun slate tonight.
Yeah, it should be. We'll see how we kind of lucked into a 6-gamer here because there's 2 makeup games on the schedule. I think it was 4 games originally, but
so what is the best way in this screen, like, to see, okay, what's our best leverage, or how are we getting different?
So that the leverage column is going to do the best job of that, right? That's going to take your exposure that you have to a certain player in that set of lineups minus the ownership projection for that particular player, and kind of sorting this column by highest to lowest will say these are your biggest stands on the slate. So obviously the 2 guys are 2 of the 3 guys we locked in up at the top. But I mean, look at the next guy that shows up, right? Michael Bridges right now, again, early in the day, ownership projections are what they are, but there's that impact of that ownership fade, right? You're getting 1% owned Michael Bridges popping in here. And that there it goes. And I mean, you can kind of look at some of these lineups and see how it's coming together, right? The sub 10% DeAndre Hunter, right? These you see the impact of that ownership fade starting to pop up a little bit here. And again, I think this is something that as ownership dials in throughout the day, we get better ownership projections. We get an idea of where the chalk's going to be. This will get a little bit better because one of the things I'm noticing here is, we're actually, Gary Trent's projected at 9% owned right now. AD's projected at 12% owned. So partially what's happening here is we lock those guys in. We turn up the ownership fade slider, and the builder's like, well, you already got 9% owned Gary Trent Jr. in there, so maybe we don't need to pack a ton of leverage into the lineup or anything like that. If this comes up to like 25% or whatever it's going to be later in the day, you'll get a little bit better results out of this. But you can see already, right? We're getting those low owned plays sneaking in here. So
and people can, I mean, if they want to change the ownership projection on there, they can do that, right? I mean, that's a column you can edit.
Yep. And I think that's a really good use of time too. I should have mentioned that before when we were talking about, what's a good way to prepare for the slate? What are you doing going up to lock? I think actually one of the best ways that you can add value to Sabersim is keeping an eye on the ownership projections too. If especially if that's something that comes up in one of the shows, maybe one of you guys says that, maybe you think this guy's going to be a little bit chalkier, or maybe that maybe there's a player that people aren't going to get to as much. Bumping and tweaking these ownership projections up or down a little bit, all that feeds into the ownership fade slider. So the more value you get, more and more value out of that slider, the tighter the ownership projections are. And we work really hard on the ownership model. We stand behind these ownership projections, but sometimes there's a situation, a guy's getting kind of steamed, or maybe there's a narrative at play that maybe the model's not taking into account as much, that can kind of boost those projections up or down a little bit. So.
Gotcha. Stephen Coy, new to Sabersim, just got a couple of days ago. Awesome. Stephen Coy is the master of Mojo in Discord. Awesome dude. So let's see, what's his question? How could I be able to load up the lineups that I built into DK? So Stephen should just go and watch that intro video that you created, correct?
Yeah, I think that'll help. The easiest thing, and I'm not entered for tonight, so I don't have an entries file for tonight. But in the video, the one that I just recently recorded, it should be up on the RunPure YouTube now. I kind of walk through towards the end of that video how to get your lineups out of Sabersim and into your entries on DK. It's super easy. It goes through the entry editor. I'll kind of show you, I guess, just the beginning. But if you click this entries tab here, if you click this download template file from DraftKings, it'll just download your entries file, and you can upload it right here and get your lineups in directly all through the app. But I walked through it in a little bit more detail in that video, so I checked that out. Actually, I think this video too. This is an older one, but this video will show you how to do it too. So that's just down here.
Yeah, I will. I'll send that video to him too. The
Okay,
one that we were talking about
cool.
as well.
A couple. Let's see. I'm seeing a few questions that I think I missed here in YouTube chat. So I'll hit a couple of these real quick. Derek said, "How does Saber come up with the ownership projections?" Good question. Since I was just talking about that, what we actually do is we'll build thousands of lineups using kind of an industry aggregate projection at a really high variance setting, and the exposure percentages we're getting in that actual build become the ownership projections for that particular slate. So I think a couple things that are really valuable about that is that since we're using real lineups to build out the ownership projections, we'll pick up on sometimes players might get a little chalkier than people might expect just because they kind of fit, right? You know, if all the values at the center position, right, you're going to have more expensive guards that get chalky. Sometimes hard to pick up on that purely just from the projections without building a lineup. So I think that's really helpful. I think the other thing that's pretty cool is if you play some of these other slates, you play the showdowns, you play some of these night slates, turbos, things like that. We'll have ownership projections that are pretty quality projections here for all of these other slates because we build them out the same way, right? So if you're playing, maybe you're playing the turbo, we want to know how the ownership's going to break out there. We've got that projected just as easily there too. So.
Yeah, and make sure you're updating the projections and everything up into lock too. The closer we are to lock and the more information that's come out, the better the projections, ownership projections, everything is going to be. So that is for sure. And I think that is the right way to build ownership projections. We say it all the time, or at least I say it all the time. In NBA especially, it's a world driven by projections, driven now by optimizers. So it makes sense to project ownership in that same fashion. So it also makes getting easier or getting different easier. It doesn't mean that that's right. Some of it will come down to luck, like last night. Isaiah Jackson, look what Terry did. Like he would have smashed last night had he not gotten hurt before it. Like I think it was like maybe 15 seconds onto the court. I mean, those things happen. That's why bankroll management is very important. And it's not wise to go all in on each and every slate for sure. But do we have any final things, or should we wrap this up? I do want to say we're going to be doing this each and every week, and we'll dial in the format, or what everyone can do. Send me questions that come up throughout the week, like maybe bigger topic questions that you want us to tackle, and I will make note, and so that we know coming into these shows too. Have an idea of things that you want us all to talk about. Jordan, do you have anything else that you want to add in today's show?
No, it was fun. The hour always goes fast. Thanks everybody that asked questions and was here watching along and hanging out with us. But yeah, no, I'm excited to keep this going here. I think it'll be fun, and that's it for me, I guess.
Yeah, next week you are going to be out, but we will have someone else on. I'll be here. And then the goal moving forward is I want to rotate in other coordinators, BigT, Glock, Gary, some of these guys. And then as we transition to other sports, we're going to get other people on here as well so that they can talk about their strategy and incorporate into the office hours show as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's an amazing idea. I have a way that I've gotten really comfortable using Sabersim over the years that kind of resonates with my process, but it's always great hearing how other people are doing things. Sometimes there's things that are a little bit different than I expected. Sometimes I learn things that I would have never thought about doing here as well. So then it kind of, gives people a little bit more options. You might come in here and watch the show and maybe what I'm doing doesn't necessarily resonate with you, but BigT comes on and you're like, oh yeah, I want to do that. That makes sense. Or anybody else. So I think that's a great idea. I think it'll be fun getting to talk to everybody about the tools. So
awesome. One last question came in that I think will be easy to answer. How do I update my own projections? Very easily.
Yep. We got this little upload button here. If you missed it, right over here on the right. Upload player projection CSV here. You can actually do this two ways. This table is like totally editable. So you could actually even just type a name in here. Like you could say Anthony Davis and say his new projection's 50. Or you could just copy and paste all your data. The other option here is to just upload the CSV here, and you can upload your projections. Just want to make sure that the columns match up. So it should be name, then projection, then ownership, and then it should go in there. We actually are planning on doing some improvements to the projection upload here to make this a little bit more flexible in the future, but for now should do exactly what you want it to do. So
awesome. Very good. Well, thank you, Jordan, for your time. If you're out there, we'll have shows all afternoon, starting over at on our Bets YouTube page. I believe JSU is on today with Spread and Tyler. Start with that show. Then we got the Hardwood Live and then the Up to Lock show. So a fun day of shows today and content. But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this each and every week. It's going to really help me out with my own process, and hopefully we're able to help everyone else out as well. But yeah, you can get us out of here, Jordan.
All right, cool. Thanks. See ya.